Okay, so when you think about old school European royalty, you probably picture things like, elegant jousting tournaments or these huge, lavish ballroom dances. But they had another pastime, and it was way, way stranger. A sport so brutal, it honestly sounds like something out of a really dark fairy tale. I mean, this quote just says it all, right? It perfectly captures how absurd this whole thing was. And this wasn't some fringe activity either. This was a celebrated event that existed at this truly bizarre intersection of like high society elegance and just shocking, shocking brutality. So what was this thing called? It was Fuchsprellen. And if you translate that from German, it literally means fox tossing or fox bouncing. Yeah. It was a competitive blood sport for the absolute elite, and the main event was, well, it was exactly as horrifying as it sounds. So the big question is, why? I mean, really, why would anyone invent a sport like this? Well, the answer seems to boil down to a combination of things. Immense wealth, way too much free time, and, for the royals of the Holy Roman Empire, what must have been a profound, almost crippling boredom. And this is where it gets so weirdly cinematic. Just picture this. The setting is these gorgeous, opulent castle courtyards, and they're filled with aristocratic couples dressed in their absolute finest. We're talking corsets, wigs, the whole shebang. It was a grand social spectacle, a major event. But the main activity was just unbelievably brutal. All right, so how did this so-called game actually work? The mechanics were deceptively simple, which honestly just makes the whole thing even more horrifying to think about. Okay, so here's how it went down. A team, which was often an aristocratic man and woman, would hold a long strip of fabric on the ground. Then, servants would just unleash hundreds of terrified animals into this enclosed space. As a frantic animal ran over the sling, the team would just yank the ends with all their might, launching it into the air like a catapult. And we're not talking about a little hop. These launches were powerful. Animals could be sent flying up to 24 feet, that's over 7 meters, into the air. To put that in perspective, that is roughly the height of a 2-story building. Just imagine that. And make no mistake, this was a real competition. There were judges and everything, awarding points for who could toss their animal the highest. And for the poor animals, this was almost always a death sentence. See, unlike a cat, a fox can't right itself in midair, so it would just crash back down onto the hard cobblestones. And of course, like any so-called sport, it had its star players. In the world of Fuchsprellen, one guy really stood out as its most famous and, let's say, enthusiastic participant, Augustus the Strong. Just look at these numbers. The scale of the carnage was absolutely staggering. During one single tournament hosted by Augustus in Dresden, records show over 600 foxes, more than 500 hares, and dozens of badgers and wildcats were killed. All of that for a single day's entertainment. And here's a little detail that tells you everything you need to know about this guy. Augustus was famous for his incredible physical strength, and he loved to show it off. So he would apparently hold his end of the sling with just a single finger, while it took 2 strong men to handle the other side. But, it wasn't always a completely one-sided slaughter. To make the sport a little more exciting, I guess, the organizers would sometimes bring in more ferocious animals. And this added a very real element of danger for the nobles themselves. So you had 2 very different scenarios playing out. Foxes and hares were pretty much helpless, but wildcats and badgers, they fought back. They'd get launched, absolutely enraged and terrified, spinning in the air with their claws out, and they'd often land right on the aristocrats and attack them viciously. I mean, their fancy clothes offered some protection, but injuries were definitely common. Thankfully, this entire era of casual cruelty did eventually come to an end. So what changed? Why did this once popular pastime just fade away? Well, the sport's decline really lines up perfectly with a major philosophical shift in Europe. As the Enlightenment started to spread in the mid-18th century, it brought all these new ideas about reason and humanity and ethics. And suddenly, what was once seen as perfectly acceptable royal entertainment was now starting to be viewed as just barbaric and cruel. And by the late 1700s, Fuchsprellen had pretty much disappeared. Which leaves us with a final kind of lingering thought, doesn't it? It's really easy for us to look back and judge, but it forces us to ask a pretty difficult question about ourselves. What parts of our modern entertainment, things we see as totally normal right now, will future generations look back on and think are just shockingly barbaric? It's definitely something to think about.